my mom and my brother and my husband and, everyone, they would try to encourage me. And
My mom and my brother and my husband and everyone, they would try to encourage me. A seemingly gentle sharing, yet it carries the weight of Danielle Spencer's stormy journey, once beloved by audiences through the series What's Happening. Danielle stepped out of the glow of childhood fame with an innocent smile, but her life became a chain of harsh trials, from family wounds to the relentless battle with illnesses and the loneliness when friends turned their backs and colleagues chose silence. Now, at the age of 72, her mother, Cheryl Pelt, has made a decision that stunned many. There are certain faces that once appeared in Danielle's life who will not be invited to her funeral. For her, this is not just a choice, but a way to protect the pure memory of her daughter. So who are those 10 names? And what does each story behind them reveal about love, betrayal, and the limits of forgiveness? To understand why Cheryl made such a decisive decision, it is necessary to return to the very beginning of Danielle's life, the place where the first wound was carved deep. That absence not only shaped her childhood, but also silently followed her throughout her life, becoming the foundation for every hurt that came after. James Spencer, the silent pain. In the life of Danielle Spencer, the actress born in 1965 in Trenton, New Jersey, the memory of her biological father, James Spencer, was always a missing piece. He was the one who gave her life, yet his presence in his daughter's childhood was almost non-existent. When Danielle was only 4 years old, her parents divorced, leaving behind a fracture not only on legal papers, but also in the soul of a child who longed for affection. From then on, the milestones of her childhood, the first day at school, her first appearance on a film set, or the 1977 accident that left her in a coma for 3 weeks, were all without his shadow. That father might have still been alive somewhere, but for Danielle, decades of silence itself was the greatest act of harm. No direct rejection was needed. Absence itself became the cruelest form of denial. Danielle did have a stepfather, Tim Pelt, who sacrificed his own life to shield her during the 1977 car accident. Yet the love of a stepfather, however immense, could not replace the emptiness left by her biological father. In many interviews, Danielle rarely mentioned James Spencer, a silence that symbolized a deep and unspoken pain. This wound was not loud, not dramatic, but it seeped quietly, becoming a gray undertone in the entire canvas of her life. For Danielle, the response did not lie in public anger, but in choosing another path. After her time in Hollywood, she turned to veterinary medicine, a profession full of compassion, perhaps to make up for the emotional deficit of her childhood. Instead of resentment, she poured her energy into caring for fragile beings, animals in need of healing. This could be understood as a kind of inner response, transforming personal pain into acts of healing for others. Her mother, Cheryl Pelt, once shared that Danielle was a woman full of love and resilience. That only showed more clearly that the lack of paternal love did not make her hardened, but instead made her long to give love even more. Yet the haunting question remained: was that love also a way of self-consolation, a therapy to fill the void her father had left behind? The answer partly revealed itself when Danielle entered her first marriage with Gary Fields, the man she once believed would bring her the protection and fulfillment her childhood had lacked. Gary Fields, the once promising partner. If the absence of her biological father had left a void in Danielle Spencer's soul, then the breakdown of her marriage to Gary Fields carved another scar. This time not from someone she had barely known, but from a man she once trusted completely. Danielle married Gary Fields in 1999, at a time when her acting career had receded and she was focusing more on her veterinary work. To the public, that marriage looked like a peaceful pause after years of turbulence: the 1977 car accident, the chronic spinal injuries, and the ups and downs of Hollywood. Gary appeared in her life as an anchor, a partner who could help her build a small family and rediscover peace. Yet marriage is always a test of faith. After more than a decade, the bond between them began to fracture. By 2013, the court officially confirmed their divorce. 14 years together may not sound short, but for a woman like Danielle, who had longed so deeply for the warmth of family, it was enough time to build hope, and equally enough to leave behind a cruel emptiness when it ended. What was most heartbreaking, however, was the timing: the years just before her life was consumed by severe illnesses. Breast cancer in 2014, a meningioma surgery in 2018, and the long string of complications that followed. In the very moments she most needed a warm hand to hold, Danielle no longer had her partner by her side. Of course, no one but those inside the marriage could ever fully know what happened in that shared home. Perhaps it was differences in lifestyle, or perhaps an invisible distance that grew between two souls once bound by promise. From another angle, Gary's leaving could be seen as a choice to relieve them both of a burden when the marriage had reached a point beyond saving. But from Danielle's perspective, or at least through the eyes of her mother, Cheryl Pelt, this separation was more than a legal document. It was a form of abandonment, a deep cut delivered at the very moment her daughter was most fragile. One wonders if in her loneliest nights Danielle asked herself, if Gary had stayed, would my battles with illness have felt less solitary? At a deeper level, this story raises the question of the true endurance of marital vows. In sickness and in health, in prosperity and in hardship, these are the words millions of couples have once spoken at the altar or before the law. But how many can hold them faithfully when the real trials come? In her final years, Danielle still tried to keep smiling, still continued her veterinary work until her health no longer allowed it. That image reflects both her resilience and her silent loneliness when the figure once called her husband was no longer there. Gary Fields was not a villain in a television drama. He was also just a man, perhaps weak, perhaps unable to bear the weight of such burdens. But for Danielle, the memory of that separation carried the color of betrayal, for it cut through her dream of being accompanied in her days of trial. And at this very point, Gary's story opens the way to another pain, not from within family ties, but from colleagues, those who once shared the stage yet for the sake of personal ambition, helped strip away one of the most important career opportunities of her life. Fred Berry, the co-star. Driven by greed. The next wound came from within the very home of art. A place that should have been a source of support, but for Danielle, it left a sense of disappointment that never quite healed. Fred Berry, born in 1951, famous for his comedic style and signature dance moves, was once one of the most beloved faces of the sitcom What's Happening, 1976-1979. Yet behind the spotlight lay the shadows of selfishness and personal ambition, which unintentionally created a distance with his younger co-star, and left Danielle with no small amount of sadness and disillusionment. Alongside Berry, Danielle was only an 11-year-old girl playing Dee Thomas, the sharp, witty younger sister who brought both humor and balance to the entire show. By the late 1970s, while ratings remained steady, Berry began openly demanding higher pay and led many tense negotiations with the producers. According to multiple sources, Berry, along with some other cast members, staged a strike that ultimately forced the show to shut down after 3 seasons, despite its popularity with audiences. For millions of viewers, it was just another series coming to an end. But for Danielle, entering her teenage years, it was the sudden collapse of a dream. A child who had grown used to the lights of the set suddenly lost the stage that defined her, leaving a void not easily filled. Cheryl, Danielle's mother, remembered vividly the heartbreak of her daughter in those days. She once recalled that after the cast broke apart, Danielle came home in silence, her face dry of tears, but heavy with a sorrow that words could not capture. For a mother, witnessing her child lose faith at such a young age was more painful than any criticism. Did Fred Berry realize that his choices affected more than his own paycheck? That they shook the future of a little girl who was his colleague? From another perspective, his actions could be seen as justified in a television industry notoriously harsh on black actors. Demanding fair pay was also a form of struggle. But for Danielle, the cost was far too high. She had no voice at the negotiating table, no power over adult decisions, and in the end, she was swept away by a storm she had no part in creating. What troubled Cheryl most was her daughter's silence. Danielle never attacked her colleague, never blamed the production. Later, in the rare moments when she spoke of What's Happening, she remained composed. Her only true response was to distance herself from Hollywood and choose another path, avoiding an industry that could at any moment strip her of opportunities. Yet Cheryl understood that silence was also a form of protest, resisting by refusing to let herself be consumed by others' ambitions. And at this very point, the story ceased to be only between Danielle and Fred Berry. It opened a larger theme. If one individual could inadvertently shatter a colleague's dream, then what happens when those with real power, the producers, the executives behind the scenes, make decisions based solely on profit? Bud Yorkin and the producers. If Fred Rerun Berry was the spark that shook the house, then the true holders of power were the producers, led by Bud Yorkin, the man who helped bring what's happening to prominence, but also the one who made the decisive call when disputes erupted. Bud Yorkin, 1926-2015, was a veteran director and producer who, alongside Norman Lear, created many of the classic sitcoms of the 1970s. For him, television was an industry where every decision was measured in ratings and revenue. When internal disputes among the cast broke out, instead of seeking compromise or protecting the ensemble, the production team chose the simplest route to cancel the show. For an ordinary viewer, a sitcom ending after 3 seasons might seem commonplace. But for Danielle Spencer, only 14 at the time, it was a door slammed shut far too abruptly. She had just begun to find her rhythm in Hollywood, had only just become a familiar face on national television, when suddenly everything collapsed in a boardroom decision she was never part of. What's Happening had maintained fairly steady ratings enough to keep a loyal audience. Yet after just 65 episodes, the show was finished. To the producers, those numbers might have been enough, but to a young girl at the start of her career, it was far too soon to stop. Perhaps in Yorkin's eyes, canceling the show was more merciful than dragging on a product already cracking. But to Danielle, it meant losing a second family, the cast, the audience, and the chance to grow alongside her character, Dee Thomas. At a deeper level, Bud Yorkin and his associates represented the cold mechanisms of the entertainment industry, a system where profit comes first and real people, especially children, are easily replaced. They can be blamed, yet it must also be admitted that they acted according to the economic logic Hollywood had sustained for decades. And it is here that the conflict becomes so difficult. How can one balance business responsibility with human responsibility? If cold calculation was enough to close down a show early, then the entrenched prejudice of casting directors would later prove even more devastating, shutting down Danielle's chances of reviving her acting career altogether. Prejudice kills talent. After the glow of childhood fame, Danielle Spencer still dreamed of one day returning to the screen. People remembered her as the witty little Dee Thomas in What's Happening, the sitcom that aired from 1976 to 1979, with a total of 65 episodes leaving its mark on millions of American viewers. Her success at just 11 years old seemed as though it would open the way to a long career. But as she grew older, things did not unfold as she had hoped. During the 1980s and 1990s, Danielle tried her luck in a few film projects, including a small role as a veterinarian in As Good as It Gets. 1997, the acclaimed film that received 7 Academy Award nominations and won 2 Oscars. For audiences, it was a delightful moment, Danielle portraying her real-life profession on screen. But for her, it was a bittersweet milestone, because after that role, Hollywood seemed to close its doors to her. The reason was not that Danielle lacked talent. Her smart and humorous acting had once made Dee a standout character in the original series. Yet when she returned to audition, she was met with doubtful looks. Casting directors and producers remembered her only as Little Dee, and that memory became an invisible chain binding her. Many casting directors turned her away outright. Audiences only remember her as Dee. It's hard to see her as anyone else. A line that seemed polite but felt like a knife cutting through her hope. Even more painful, some projects didn't allow her to audition at all simply because her resume listed her as a 1970s sitcom child star. A label considered past her time in the eyes of those in power. Danielle knew exactly what she was up against: prejudice. The prejudice that a child star could never transform into anyone beyond the role that made them famous. The prejudice that audiences only wanted the memory, not the maturity. And that prejudice was enough to shut every door, killing her second attempt at an acting career before it could ever begin. No matter how strong she was, Danielle could not hide her sorrow. Cheryl, her mother, remembered vividly the moment her daughter quietly hung up her costume and whispered, "Maybe I don't belong there anymore." Behind that line was an entire dream, shattered. Danielle chose to walk away from Hollywood, pouring her heart into veterinary medicine, a path that brought genuine joy as she treated thousands of pets and received the gratitude of their families. Yet even in that happiness, she and her mother could not escape the bitterness of how the industry had treated someone who had once given so much. To Cheryl, this was a prime example of Hollywood's short-sightedness and cruelty. In her view, every casting director who had slammed the door on her daughter just because of an outdated prejudice did not deserve to be present at Danielle's funeral. Prejudice kills talent, she said, and struck those figures, symbolic or real, from the guest list. The message she wanted to leave behind was unmistakable. A person's talent should never be confined by their past. A role, no matter how successful, is only one part of the journey. It should never be an excuse to strip away future opportunities. And in a cruel twist, many years later, when her daughter returned to the media to share her story of resilience, Danielle was once again wounded by insensitivity. This time, not from the studio heads, but from a television host right in front of the cameras. The insensitive host. In 2010, after nearly 3 decades away from the screen, Danielle Spencer decided to tell her life story through her memoir, Through the Fire Journal of a Child Star. The book quickly drew attention for revealing both her pain and extraordinary resilience from the 1977 car accident that left her in a coma for weeks with spinal cord damage and near paralysis to her battle with breast cancer in 2014. Danielle once said that writing the memoir was like a form of therapy and also a way to inspire those struggling in adversity. Thanks to this, she returned to television, appearing on programs like Life After and The Wendy Williams Show between 2010 and 2011. Where nostalgic audiences remembered the lively little Dee Thomas of the 1970s sitcom What's Happening. Yet, not everyone in the media respected that journey. During one appearance on a talk show notorious for its sensationalist style, Danielle faced an almost unbelievable lack of sensitivity. The host made no effort to highlight the bright aspects of her life, such as her perseverance in becoming a veterinarian, or the simple joy she found in caring for patients' pets. Instead, the host fixated on her tragedies, the near-fatal accident, 2 years spent on crutches, her 2013 divorce, and the long battle with cancer. The low point came when the host mockingly remarked, "It feels like your life is just a sad movie script." Danielle, drawing loud laughter from the studio audience while the guest herself forced a weary smile, her eyes clouded. Not stopping there, the host pressed further with tactless questions. "Do you resent God for giving you so much misfortune?" Danielle froze, stunned by the bluntness, then tried to answer politely, but it was clear she was being forced to reopen wounds that had not yet healed. Backstage, Danielle quietly wiped her reddened eyes. Her mother, Cheryl, watching live from home, burst into angry tears. In her view, her daughter had been used as a tool for ratings, her suffering exploited instead of her resilience being honored. In the days that followed, Danielle rarely mentioned the interview again. She only said softly, "Not everyone understands the positive message I want to share." But Cheryl knew the truth deep inside. Her daughter was disappointed and hurt. Danielle had hoped to spread the spirit of overcoming adversity, but instead she received cheap laughs at the expense of her pain. For someone who had given her childhood to the audience who had suffered when What's Happening was abruptly canceled due to money disputes, who had endured 2 battles with cancer, to be treated that way was truly a betrayal of trust. Cheryl firmly declared any journalist or host who had ever disrespected Danielle would have no place in her daughter's final farewell. "My daughter's funeral is a space of love and compassion, not a stage for the insensitive to perform or chase headlines," she said. But the wounds that Danielle Spencer had to endure didn't just come from the heartless media. Another, more bitter and difficult to heal form of pain was the silent betrayal from the pens of the press, who turned her story of resilience into a tragic drama for public amusement. The press, a silent betrayal. The life of Danielle Spencer was a symphony of resilience and tragedy, a challenging journey she overcame with admirable perseverance. However, instead of being honored, her story was twisted into a sensational movie script, where the emotionless media acted as the director and her personal tragedies became tools for views. After many years away from the spotlight to find peace in her life as a veterinarian, Danielle decided to publish her memoir, Through the Fire Journal of a Child Star, in 2010. She wasn't seeking a return to fame, but wanted to share her story of survival, of how she found meaning in life after leaving the spotlight. But the media ignored all of that. They only saw a potential piece of entertainment, a story that could generate huge profits. The press sensationalized her tragic life and the sad ending of a child star. Her pain, her silent struggle, all were packaged into catchy, saleable phrases for a completely distorted narrative. They turned her into a typical victim, a symbol of failure rather than a model of resilience. Newspapers relentlessly dug into her old wounds, morbidly describing the near-death moment from the 1977 car accident. They turned her personal pain into a violent script to attract readers. Even her personal relationships were put on display. Her marriage to Gary Fields ended in 2013, right before she had to face a series of serious illnesses. The press didn't bother to find out the reasons for the divorce, but instead focused on portraying her as an abandoned wife, a victim of fate. Her loneliness and heartbreak were exposed to the public, adding an extra burden to a woman who was already fighting her illnesses alone. In her final years as Danielle battled cancer and a brain tumor, the media gave her no peace. They didn't write about her resilience, but instead used tragic words like painful struggle and cruel fate. Even more, the press didn't just report on events, they also callously speculated on Danielle's emotions. They read her smile as a way of hiding her sadness and turned her private feelings into a topic for public analysis. This deeply hurt her as her pain was dissected and turned into a form of entertainment. Even after her death, her mother Cheryl Pelt had to face insensitive questions about the funeral. Her mother's grief was turned into a sensational story. The media proved they would continue to exploit pain until the very end. The wounds of Danielle Spencer came not only from personal tragedies, but also from the heartlessness of a world that only cares about profit. And that heartlessness was not only shown through news articles, but also cruelly portrayed through the cold silence of the very people who once called her family. The cold silence of colleagues. In the world of entertainment, where the dazzling stage lights often conceal the darker sides of life, collegial bonds are rarely as strong as people imagine. For Danielle Spencer, this truth became even more apparent once the childhood glory of what's happening faded. Except for a few close friends like Ernest Thomas and Haywood Nelson, the big brothers from her early days, and Holly Robinson Peete, a childhood acquaintance, most former colleagues seemed to vanish from her life. This truth became even more glaring when Danielle entered the most difficult period of her life, years of battling relentless illnesses. From 2014, when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, to 2018, the year she underwent brain surgery followed later by late-stage stomach cancer, Danielle endured a long, painful journey. Aside from a handful of loyal friends, the majority of her old colleagues remained completely silent. Not a single letter, not a single phone call. This silence felt even more bitter when Cheryl, Danielle's mother, recalled 2006 when her daughter was still well enough to attend the TV Land Awards, where many of those same colleagues happily posed for photos with her, reminiscing about their golden days. They once called each other a set family, but when Danielle fell ill, nearly all of them disappeared. Cheryl could understand everyone is busy, everyone is afraid of confronting sorrow. But understanding is one thing, acceptance another. Watching her daughter writhe in illness each day, Cheryl increasingly felt the coldness of that silence like an invisible blade. Danielle, true to her gentle nature, never voiced reproach. Once she offered her mother a sad smile and said, "Mom, maybe people don't want to bother a sick person, so they didn't reach out." Those words sounded like self-comfort, but Cheryl knew well that beneath that gentleness lay a loneliness that could not easily fade. Danielle once considered the film crew her second family, believing shared memories would bind them for life. But in the end, as death drew near, she had only her mother, a few steadfast friends, and the quiet nurses by her bedside. For Cheryl, the silence of those colleagues was not just an absence, but a silent betrayal. Perhaps they didn't mean to. Perhaps they simply chose avoidance, but the outcome was the same. Danielle left this world feeling forgotten. That is why Cheryl believes that those who were not there for her daughter in life need not attend her funeral. If a funeral wreath is nothing more than a belated gesture of compensation, then I must decline it, she once shared in an interview, as a strong declaration about who truly deserved a place at her daughter's farewell. For Cheryl, not every presence carries meaning, especially when some names once celebrated as television icons ultimately revealed hypocrisy and darkness behind the glitter. One of the most striking examples of this light before the public darkness behind the curtain was Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, the disgraced icon and the heavy shadow. Bill Cosby was once a legend of American television, a contemporary of Danielle, but later became a scandal-ridden figure whose downfall cast a shadow over an entire generation of artists. In Danielle's career, Cosby was not a direct companion, but his name was inseparable from the entertainment culture she had once been a part of. A culture where trust and star images could collapse overnight. Cosby had long been praised as America's dad through The Cosby Show, 1984-1992. One of the most successful sitcoms of all time, averaging more than 30 million viewers per episode. He was the symbol of warmth, wisdom, and happy family life in American culture. For those of Danielle's generation, Cosby represented a professional ideal, an artist who could both shine and create a positive impact. But then, after more than 60 women accused him of sexual assault, Cosby fell from icon to disgrace. In 2018, he was sentenced to prison, and although his conviction was overturned in 2021 due to procedural issues, his reputation was nearly impossible to cleanse. For Danielle, the collapse of Cosby's image may have meant more than just another entertainment scandal. Cosby was not just an individual. He symbolized the darker side of the industry where she began her journey. Looking at his case, Danielle, who had endured her own injustices in Hollywood, from being pushed aside by producers to being constrained by casting stereotypes, may have felt a bitter mix of empathy and resentment. This was an industry that nurtured and glorified idols, yet could also hide the truth for decades. From a multidimensional view, one might say Cosby once brought inspiration to the African American community and global audiences, creating a show that became cultural history. But on the other hand, the allegations and evidence made it impossible to separate his legacy from his personal crimes. For artists like Danielle, having worked in the same professional space as giants like Cosby also meant they were inevitably touched by the shadow of public suspicion. Who enabled him? Who stayed silent? Who knew but didn't dare to speak? Those questions have echoed for years. If Cosby embodied the collapse of an icon, then the media itself became the magnifying mirror, sometimes turning an artist's pain like Danielle's into an endless spectacle. The stage lights meant to celebrate often distorted reality, fueling rumors that cut like scars. The story of Danielle Spencer and the list of 10 uninvited names leaves us with much to reflect upon. It is not merely a matter of personal choice, but a powerful statement about the value of humanity, loyalty, and the respect owed to those who have passed away. If this story has touched your heart, please support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your companionship is the very motivation that allows us to continue bringing meaningful, humane, and deeply inspiring stories to life.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.